winter fog clung to the hedgerows of eastern France like a living thing, heavy and wet, muffling sound and swallowing men whole, private first class. Tommy Hale stood knee-deep in frozen mud, his M1 Garand hugged to his chest, breath rising in short white bursts. Somewhere ahead, beyond the trees and ruined farmhouses, the German lines waited. Or at least, that's what command said. Lately, nothing about this war felt certain. Hell of a way to spend Christmas, Sergeant Jack Mallory muttered beside him, tugging his helmet lower. Mallory was from Ohio, a factory man before the war, built like an oak stump and just as steady. He'd been fighting since North Africa, and he carried himself like someone who no longer believed in luck, only survival. Tommy didn't answer. He was 21, from a wheat farm outside Salina, Kansas, and he still carried the smell of home in his memory, cut hay, engine grease, his mother's apple pies cooling on the sill. He hadn't told anyone, but every night before sleep he pictured his younger brother walking the fields alone now, doing the work of two men. A low rumble rolled across the frozen earth, artillery, distant but heavy. The Germans were firing blind again. "They're nervous," Corporal Eddie Rizzo said from behind them, a Brooklyn accent cutting through the cold. "Means something's wrong on their end." Mallory snorted. "You sound like you've been reading Stars and Stripes editorials." Rizzo shrugged. "I just know this ain't the same Kraut army we met last year. Half the time they don't even know where their own units are." That was true. Since the push after D-Day, the Germans had fought hard, but something had shifted. Orders contradicted each other. Counterattacks came too late, or not at all. Prisoners spoke of officers arguing, of fuel shortages, of commands coming straight from Berlin that made no sense on the ground. Tommy had seen it with his own eyes 3 days earlier, an entire German platoon surrendering without firing a shot, their lieutenant shaking, eyes hollow. The man had kept whispering one word in English he must have learned somewhere: Hitler. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the skeletal remains of a farmhouse ahead. Its roof had collapsed inward, blackened beams jutting like broken ribs. That was their objective. Take it, hold it, wait for the next order. Lieutenant Charles Weaver crouched low as he moved down the line, checking positions. Weaver was young, fresh out of ROTC when the war grabbed him, but there was a calm in his eyes that steadied men. He carried a folded map already smeared with mud and pencil marks. "Listen up," Weaver said quietly. "Recon says enemy presence is light, but scattered. Could be stragglers, could be a trap. We move slow. Nobody fires unless they have to." Mallory nodded. "Sir, any word from battalion about that armored support we were promised?" Weaver hesitated just long enough for Tommy to notice. "Delayed," he said. "Fuel issues." Fuel issues. That phrase had been floating through the ranks like a ghost. The Germans were sure on it. So were the Americans sometimes. The difference was American command adapted. The Germans, at least the ones following Hitler's direct orders, did not. They advanced, boots crunching softly over frost-hardened earth. The silence was worse than gunfire. Every snapped twig felt like a death sentence. Inside the farmhouse, they found chaos. Overturned tables, empty shell casings. A blood smear dragged across the floor toward a back door that hung off its hinges. The place had been a command post, maps still pinned to a wall, German words scrawled in frantic handwriting. Rizzo picked up a map and whistled low. "You guys see this?" Weaver stepped over, studying it. "These arrows..." "This was supposed to be a counter-offensive," Mallory frowned. "Against us?" Weaver shook his head slowly. "Against their own retreat. Looks like Berlin ordered them to hold this ground at all costs." Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Why would they do that? Weaver didn't answer right away. He folded the map carefully, like it was something fragile, because someone far away refuses to accept reality. Outside, a burst of machine gun fire cracked the air. The men dropped instinctively, hearts slamming. But the firing stopped just as suddenly. A young German soldier stumbled into view, hands raised, rifle dangling uselessly from its sling. He couldn't have been more than 16. His uniform hung loose, his face pale and terrified. "No, don't shoot, bitte!" the boy cried. Mallory moved first, disarming him, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Easy, kid. War's over for you." The boy collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Through broken English and tears, he babbled about orders that made no sense, about officers shot for retreating, about a leader who demanded cities be held even when there were no men left to hold them. Tommy watched him and felt something twist inside his chest. This wasn't the enemy he'd imagined back in Kansas. This was a child crushed under the weight of a madman's pride. That night, as they dug in around the farmhouse, the sky lit up red to the east. German cities burned. Everyone knew it. The war was turning, but it was turning ugly. Mallory lit a cigarette, shielding the flame with his hand. "You know what scares me," he said quietly to Tommy. "A cornered animal, especially one whose boss won't let it die." Tommy stared into the darkness, gripping his rifle. Somewhere, Adolf Hitler was making decisions that sent boys to die and men like them into the grinder. And as the Nazi regime began to crack from the inside, the danger on the ground only grew more unpredictable. The fog rolled back in, thicker than before, and with it came the sound of distant boots, marching, disorganized, but coming closer. Tommy swallowed hard. The war wasn't ending yet. It was just entering its most desperate phase. The boots came closer in the dark, scuffing, uneven, too many feet moving without rhythm. Tommy lay prone behind a half-collapsed stone wall, cheek pressed to frozen dirt, the farmhouse looming behind him like a wounded animal. His breath felt loud in his ears. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, waiting for the first shot that would break the night apart. Lieutenant Weaver crawled along the line, whispering orders. "Hold fire. Let them show themselves." Mallory was 10 feet to Tommy's left, eyes narrowed, finger resting outside the trigger guard. Rizzo was behind them, clutching the bar like a lifeline. No one joked now. No one breathed more than they had to. Shapes emerged from the fog. German soldiers, maybe a dozen, moving in a loose cluster. They weren't advancing like a trained unit. They were stumbling, arguing in low, frantic voices. One man gestured wildly with his rifle, pointing east, then west, then back behind them. "They're lost," Rizzo whispered. "Or bait," Mallory replied. A flare shot up somewhere behind the Germans, washing the field in harsh white light. For a split second, everything froze. Faces, uniforms, fear. Then, all hell broke loose. A German machine gun opened up from the tree line, bullets chewing into stone and wood. Weaver shouted, "Contact front! Return fire!" Tommy squeezed the trigger. The Garand kicked against his shoulder, the familiar metallic clang echoing as the clip emptied. He barely registered it as he slammed in another, firing again, aiming at shadows that darted and fell. The Germans scattered, some firing wildly, others dropping their weapons and running. One man ran straight toward the farmhouse, screaming something over and over. "Cease fire!" Weaver yelled. "Cease!" Too late. Mallory fired a short burst. The man went down hard, sliding in the mud, his scream cut short. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the ringing in Tommy's ears. They waited 10 long minutes before moving. When they did, it was with rifles raised, nerves shot. The German machine gun crew had vanished. All that remained were abandoned packs, a spilled ammo belt, and blood soaking into the frozen ground. Rizzo kicked at a discarded helmet. "What the hell was that?" Weaver rubbed his face with a gloved hand. "A unit without orders, or with too many." By dawn, the fog lifted just enough to reveal the damage. 3 German dead, 2 wounded, now prisoners. One American casualty, Private Lewis from Arkansas, hit in the throat during the opening burst. He'd bled out before the medic could reach him. They buried him behind the farmhouse, a shallow grave marked with a rifle and helmet. No chaplain. Just silence and bowed heads. Tommy stared at the mound of earth, his stomach hollow. Lewis had shown him pictures of his wife just the night before. She was pregnant, due in March. Mallory placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Don't carry it alone, kid," he said quietly. But Tommy already was. Orders came late that afternoon. Battalion wanted them to push east, probe the German line near a crossroads town, whose name Tommy couldn't pronounce. Intelligence claimed the Germans were pulling back, but intercepts suggested conflicting commands from Berlin: hold at all costs, then retreat, then counterattack. "Hitler's micromanaging again," Weaver said bitterly as he read the message. "Ordering divisions that don't exist anymore." They moved at dusk, the sky bruised purple and red. As they advanced, signs of collapse became impossible to ignore. Burned-out tanks with no fuel, abandoned artillery pieces sabotaged by their own crews, dead horses stiff in the fields, wagons overturned. In one village, they found civilians emerging cautiously from cellars, French families, hollow-eyed and starving. An old man grabbed Weaver's sleeve, speaking rapid French, pointing east. Rizzo translated poorly, enough to understand. "He says German officers shot their own men this morning for retreating." Tommy felt his jaw clench. Jesus. The crossroads came under fire just before midnight. German artillery, accurate, desperate. Shells slammed into buildings, turning stone into shrapnel. The Americans dove for cover as the town exploded around them. "Get inside! Move!" Mallory shouted. They took refuge in a church, its stained glass already shattered, saints reduced to jagged fragments underfoot. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Inside, chaos reigned. Wounded men cried out. The medic worked frantically, hands slick with blood, morphine in short supply. A runner burst in, breathless. "Lieutenant, German armor reported north side. But they're not advancing. They're just sitting there." Weaver stared at him. "Sitting? Yes, sir. Engines running. No movement." It made no sense. Until it did. "They don't have orders," Mallory said, "or they've got orders they can't follow." The shelling stopped as abruptly as it began. An eerie quiet settled over the town. Then, from the north, a lone German tank lurched forward, then stalled, coughing black smoke. Its turret rotated aimlessly before the hatch popped open. A German officer climbed out, waving a white cloth. Tommy watched, stunned, as more hatches opened. Men climbed out, hands raised. Some were crying, some looked relieved. The officer shouted in broken English, "We surrender! No more! The Führer is mad!" The Americans held their fire, disbelief etched on every face. Weaver stepped forward cautiously. "Secure them," he ordered. "All of them." As they disarmed dozens of German soldiers, Tommy felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. This wasn't victory the way the newsreels showed it. This was an empire rotting from the inside, collapsing under the weight of one man's refusal to admit defeat. That night as they held the crossroads, the sky thundered with Allied bombers heading deeper into Germany. The war machine was breaking, but it was breaking violently, unpredictably. Tommy leaned against the church wall, exhausted, eyes burning. Mallory sat beside him, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. "You still think about home?" Mallory asked. "Every damn minute," Tommy said. Mallory nodded. "Good. Means you're still human." Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a German radio crackled with a voice shouting impossible orders into the void. And far away, in a bunker beneath a ruined city, a dictator raged as his world collapsed, dragging countless lives down with it. The crossroads would not stay quiet for long. The counterattack came before dawn. just when exhaustion had dulled the men's nerves and the cold had settled deep into their bones. Tommy was half asleep against the church wall when the first explosion tore through the north end of town, shaking dust from the rafters and sending fragments of stone raining down like shrapnel. "Incoming!" someone screamed. The night erupted. German artillery pounded the crossroads with renewed fury, shells slamming into buildings already half destroyed. The ground bucked beneath Tommy as he scrambled to his feet, rifle in hand, heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Mallory barreled past him, barking orders. "Positions! Same as before! Move! Move!" Outside, flames leapt skyward as a row of houses caught fire. The church bells, miraculously still hanging, rang once as a shell struck nearby, then fell silent forever. Weaver shouted into the chaos, "This is it! They're throwing everything they've got left!" German infantry surged out of the darkness, more organized than before, but driven by something frantic, almost suicidal. Some wore mismatched uniforms, others carried outdated weapons. They advanced under covering fire from mortars that landed too close, even for their own men. "They don't care anymore," Rizzo yelled, firing the bar until the barrel smoked. Tommy took aim at a charging figure and fired. The man fell, but another took his place, and another. The fog was back, thick with smoke and dust, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of shadows and screams. A German officer stood in the open, pistol raised, shouting orders, pushing his men forward. A shell landed yards away, knocking him off his feet. He crawled back up, blood streaming down his face, still yelling. Mallory saw it and shook his head grimly. "That's what happens when command's gone to hell," he muttered. "No plan. Just rage." The Germans broke through on the east side. Close quarters fighting erupted in the streets. Rifle butts, grenades, men colliding in the dark. Tommy found himself face to face with a German soldier no older than he was. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. They both froze for a split second that felt like a lifetime. The boy fired first. The shot went wide. Tommy fired back. The boy fell, his helmet rolling into the gutter. Tommy stood there shaking, the echo of the shot ringing in his skull. He'd killed before, but this one felt different. This one felt personal. A scream cut through the din. "Medic!" Rizzo was down. Shrapnel had torn into his leg, blood pooling fast. The medic slid in beside him, hands moving quickly. "Hang on, Eddie," Mallory said, gripping his shoulder. "You're gonna make it." Rizzo tried to grin, teeth clenched in pain. "You tell Brooklyn I didn't run." Another explosion rocked the street. A German half-track burst into view, firing wildly. Its crew looked panicked, eyes darting, hands jerking the controls like they didn't trust them. Weaver grabbed Tommy by the shoulder. "With me!" They ran, bullets snapping past, toward a collapsed building where a bazooka team lay dead beside their weapon. Weaver dropped to his knees, yanking the launcher free. "Cover me!" Tommy fired until his rifle clicked empty, reloading with numb fingers as Weaver took aim. The half-track swerved, machine gun chattering uselessly into the rubble. Weaver fired. The rocket struck the half-track square in the side. The explosion lit up the street, the vehicle flipping onto its back, flames pouring out. German soldiers scattered, some on fire, some crawling, some not moving at all. For a moment, there was a lull. Smoke hung thick in the air. The sounds of battle faded into distant gunfire and crackling flames. Then the radio crackled. "Enemy units withdrawing! Repeat! Germans are pulling back!" It was sudden, almost unreal. After hours of chaos, they were just gone, leaving bodies, broken equipment, and silence behind. The Americans stood there, stunned, waiting for the trap that didn't come. Weaver sank against a wall, helmet pushed back, face gray. "They broke," he said quietly. "They finally broke." Tommy looked around at the devastation, the dead in the streets, the church burning, the wounded crying softly. Victory tasted like ash. Mallory crouched beside Rizzo, who was pale but alive. "Hear that, Eddie? You get to go home." Rizzo laughed weakly, then winced. "Damn right." As dawn crept over the horizon, Allied tanks rolled in from the west, engines roaring, stars painted bright on their sides. Reinforcements at last. A captured German sergeant sat on the curb, head in his hands. When Tommy passed, the man looked up, eyes hollow. "He lied to us," the sergeant said in accented English. "He said the armies would rise, that the miracle would come." Tommy didn't answer. There was nothing to say. News filtered down later that morning. Hitler had ordered the counterattack personally, demanded the crossroads be retaken no matter the cost. Units with no fuel, no coordination, no chance had been thrown into the fire. It had failed, like so many of his orders now. Tommy sat on the steps of the ruined church, watching smoke drift into the pale sky. He thought of Louis, of the German boy in the street, of Kansas fields under a summer sun. The Nazi regime was collapsing, tearing itself apart from the inside. But the cost, God, the cost, was written in blood on every stone of that town. Mallory joined him, lighting his last cigarette. "You know," he said softly, "history's going to talk about generals and leaders, but it's guys like us who pay for their mistakes." Tommy nodded, eyes stinging. The battle was over. The war was not. The snow began to fall sometime after noon, light at first, then steady, softening the sharp edges of destruction. It settled on burned-out vehicles, on shattered rooftops, on the still forms of men waiting to be collected. The crossroads town, whose name none of the Americans would ever remember, looked almost peaceful under its white shroud, like it was trying to forget what had happened there. Tommy helped carry the wounded to a makeshift aid station set up in a schoolhouse. Rizzo was loaded onto a stretcher, his face drawn but conscious. "You owe me a beer," Rizzo said as they lifted him. Tommy managed a smile. "I'll owe you a whole case." Mallory leaned in close. "You better come collect." Rizzo was hauled away, headed west toward a hospital and, if luck held, a future. Watching him go, Tommy felt something loosen in his chest, a small knot of fear releasing its grip. They buried their dead that afternoon. Louis, 2 others from a neighboring company, simple graves, rifles, helmets, dog tags clinking softly in the cold air. Weaver spoke a few words, his voice steady, despite the dark circles under his eyes. "They held the line," he said. "That's all any soldier can do." As the men dispersed, Tommy lingered, staring at the markers. He tried to imagine the war ending, tried to imagine going home and explaining all this to people who hadn't smelled burned flesh or felt the ground shake beneath their feet. He didn't know if he could. Later, orders came down to move east again. The Germans were retreating fast now, whole units surrendering, others dissolving into nothing as officers vanished or were killed. Reports filtered in of chaos behind enemy lines, railroads bombed, factories silent, cities in ruins, and from Berlin still came impossible commands. That night, around a small fire, Mallory shared a bit of news he'd overheard on the radio. "They say Hitler's firing generals left and right, accusing everyone of betrayal." Tommy poked at the fire with a stick. "Doesn't change anything for us." Mallory shook his head. "No, but it explains a lot." A week later, they crossed into Germany. The land felt different, heavier somehow. Civilians watched from doorways, faces blank, eyes following the American columns with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Some offered no resistance. Some offered nothing at all. In one town, they found a German officer who had shot himself in his headquarters rather than face capture. On his desk lay a stack of orders stamped with the Führer's seal, each contradicting the last. Advance, hold, counterattack, die. Weaver stared at the papers for a long time before folding them away. This war didn't have to end like this, he said quietly. No, Mallory agreed, but it was never going to end any other way. The final weeks blurred together, long marches, brief skirmishes, endless surrenders. The fear was still there, but it was different now, dulled by the sense that the end was finally in sight. Then, one morning in May, it happened. The firing stopped, not just in their sector, everywhere. Word spread like wildfire through the ranks. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Men laughed, men cried. Some just sat down where they were and stared at the ground, as if afraid to believe it. Tommy felt numb at first, then suddenly overwhelmed. Mallory pulled him into a rough hug. "We made it, kid." Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, we did." That night, they drank whatever they could find. They sang off key. They remembered the ones who weren't there. Louis, the German boy, too many others. Weeks later, as Tommy boarded a transport bound for home, he looked back one last time at the continent that had changed him forever. He thought about the stories that would be told, about battles won, about evil defeated, about leaders and speeches and flags. But he knew the truth was quieter and sadder. The Nazi regime hadn't just been crushed by Allied guns. It had collapsed under the weight of its own lies, its own cruelty, its own leaders' refusal to see the world as it was. And in that collapse, millions, soldiers and civilians alike, had paid the price. Tommy carried those faces with him as the ship pulled away, the ocean stretching wide and bright ahead. Home was waiting, but the war would never really leave him.